Hey, so my phone has much higher recording quality, but after I made that video, my phone started freaking the hell out. So while it is recovering from its freak out, I'm going to do this. So in the last video, we talked briefly um, about Plato's sort of his bifurcation of reality, right? He splits reality into two parts, right? There is the visible, concrete part, right? That's the world that we live in, right? That's the water we drink. Those are the keys that we handle. Those are the books that we read. There's also the world of ideas, the world of forms, right? And this world exists outside of space and time, right? It exists outside of our own world, right? Of the physical world we live in. So paradigm examples of objects existing in this realm of forms are mathematical objects, right? I mean, also there's going to be stuff like beauty and justice, right? But let's stick with math for right now, because that gives us, I think, a clear idea of what Plato's up to. So there are things like perfect squares, perfect circles, perfect trapezoids, and numbers, and all of these things exist beyond the physical world around us. And we could see, in a way, why mathematical objects are paradigm objects for Plato, right? Because the number 2 just is what it is, right? I mean, 1,000 years ago, 2 was 2, right? Even before there were human beings walking on the earth, 2 plus 2 equaled 4, right? So, or consider the Pythagorean theorem, right? That if you have a right-angled triangle, that the sum of the squares of the 2 shorter sides is equal to the square of the hypotenuse, right? I mean, this is just something that's true of all right triangles, right? It's just fact, right? It's there. We know it. It's not going to change anytime in the near future, right? Or take how we think of a circle, right? A circle is a shape where every point on the line is equidistant from the center. Right? Again, if you have a circle and you have a genuine circle, then it's not going to change, right? As soon as some point along its perimeter fails to be equidistant, then you don't have a circle anymore, right? You've got something else. So perfect. So mathematical objects are unchanging, right? 2 is 2, circles are circles. Now, by contrast, consider my plant here, right? So my plant, as I mentioned before, is always changing, right? Flowers bloom and they die. This one leaf just keeps getting bigger. I don't quite know what to do about it. I should work out something. I'm afraid it's going to take over the other leaves. But anyway, this thing is constantly changing. So this isn't a proper object of knowledge. Right? Again, because it's constantly changing, it is not a proper object of knowledge. And the reason is because as soon as it changes, the thing that exists now is no longer the thing that we know, right? So we can think of it this way, right? Imagine somebody you knew when you were 5, right? And imagine meeting that person now, right? And imagine that in between when you knew them when you were 5 and when you knew them now, imagine that some huge change happened, right? So so it was one of your peers in kindergarten, and you meet them now. Well, there can be a lot of differences. And so the things you knew of the 5-year-old simply don't hold of the person you know now, right? So we don't really have knowledge of things that are changing because what we experience in the now isn't the thing we know, right? Our knowledge is always of something past. So I think that's part of the inspiration for Plato in his divided line illustration. So at the end of Book 6 of the Republic, he gives us this illustration of the divided line, right? Where he does some sort of weird proportion thing that I still don't totally get. That doesn't matter. What's important for us is that Plato defines 4 different ways of grasping objects of knowledge, right? And correspondingly 4 different objects that we can intellectually or cognitively grasp. So he first talks about imagination, right? So imagination deals with images, right? And that is the lowest form of cognitive grasping, right? So we use imagination when we, think about things like images in water, reflections in water, photographs, painting, statues, that sort of stuff. Next, we have belief, So belief deals with the originals of those images, right? So not just the reflection in the water, but the thing as it exists, right? The thing is that as you can touch it or perceive it. So you have imagination dealing with images, then you have belief dealing with the originals of those images. Then you have what he calls thought. So thought deals with abstract principles that go beyond what we perceive, right, and that propel us towards eternal knowledge. So these are kind of like sort of temporary hypotheses. So think, for example, about geometry, right? When you're doing proofs in geometry, we say, let's assume for the sake of the argument that these lines are parallel, right? You draw two lines on the board. Well, I mean, those lines aren't really parallel, but we say, just assume for the sake of the argument that they are. Well, knowledge we get from those kinds of temporary assumptions, I don't want to use the word knowledge here, so that was wrong of me. The intellectual grasping that we get from assuming these hypotheticals is what Plato calls thought. So the important thing here, though, is that we're moving beyond the visible world to consider something of a more idealized realm, right? We abstract away from the local imperfections, the temporary imperfections, to think about more permanent things. Finally, we get understanding. So we have imagination dealing with images, belief dealing with the originals of those images, thought dealing with hypotheticals going beyond what we perceive. And then you have understanding. And understanding deals with forms, right? That's when you get up to the abstract knowledge, or rather with knowledge of abstract entities that are the blueprint of reality, right? So it's really, you're dissociating yourself from the world around us, and thereby getting a kind of deeper insight into the nature of reality. So again, you have these different grades of intellectual or cognitive graspings: imagination, belief, thought, understanding. Now, one of the things that's odd for Plato, maybe not odd, we'll see, is that we don't really know anything when it comes to our senses. So, I have a cup of water here. I want to say that I know that there's water in here. How do I know this? Well, I can look inside and I can see the surface of the water. I can put my finger in it, right? And I feel that there's liquid in here and that it's wet. I can take a sip and I will taste water. But be that as it may, right, despite all of this sensory input, on Plato's view, I don't know that there's water in here. You may ask yourself, well, why, right? Because I have all of this sensory data telling me that there's water in here. And the answer is kind of straightforward and simple for Plato. I don't know that there's water in there because the water that's in the cup is changing. It's temporary, right? What it is now is not what it was 30 seconds ago, 5 seconds ago, a millisecond ago. So the cutting edge, we can think of the cutting edge of reality is always unknowable or ungraspable for us, right? We're always living with the way things were just a moment ago. And so the things we know of a moment ago aren't the way things are now. And so I can't really know anything about the now because the now will soon drift into the past, right? And then I'm dealing with a brand new now. So the water in the cup isn't something I can know, right? I can't understand or have thoughts about the water in the cup. Thought in the way that, with our hierarchy of cognitive grasping that we mentioned just a couple of minutes ago. So I don't know that there's water in the cup. But I can know certain things about the form of water, right? About the abstract idea of water as it exists outside of space and time, right? So what are some of these things? Well, to be perfectly honest, I'm not entirely sure. It might be something like water is wet, right? How would I know this? Well, it's part of the essence of water to be wet, right? Like I can't imagine water without imagining something wet. Or perhaps I can know certain mathematical properties about water, right? If I go down to the level of water molecules, I know that so we've got, you've got your one oxygen molecule, or the one oxygen atom, you've got your two hydrogens. Well, that angle between those two hydrogens is a constant, right? I think it's like 101 point something degrees. You can look it up if you really want to. I can know that about the water, right? I can know mathematical properties about the water. But beyond that, I don't know what I can know, because anything perceived, or anything I know by means of perception, doesn't count as genuine knowledge. And it's because perception deals with what's temporary, whereas reason, the intellect, deals with what's eternal. So what we find in the allegory of the cave, which if you had a chance to listen to, or to watch that 8-bit philosophy clip that I posted on our website, on our Blackboard page, if you have a chance to watch that, I highly encourage you to do so. It's a nice little 2-minute summary that gets at all the essential details. What the allegory of the cave tells us is that the philosopher seeks to go beyond what we perceive, right, and to go into the realm of forms. So, because it's one of these great pieces of philosophical literature, there are a number of ways we can interpret this. And so we're going to keep it at a fairly straightforward level. Namely, that the job of the philosopher is to go beyond what's perceived to get at the essence of things. On Plato's view, the essence of things, what we can really know, exists beyond the world we occupy, right? Exists in the unchanging, eternal, rational realm of the forms. Right? So the world we live in is a chaotic, disorganized, tangible, unintelligible domain. Right? That's the realm of the prisoners. Right? Or rather, more specifically, the realm of the prisoners, where we have both the images on the cave wall and the originals of those images. That's the world we see. That's the world that we bodily occupy. The realm of the forms is when you get the prisoner ascending out of the cave and getting into the world outside of the cave. Right? That's the world we're supposed to ascend to, because we leave behind temporary, changing details about how things are, and we get at eternal, unchanging knowledge of a perfect version of reality, right? The blueprint of our physical reality. Now, in the allegory of the cave, Plato highlights one form in particular, right? It's the form of the good. So what's so special about the form of the good? Well, it's that in virtue of which things are knowable. Right? So the form of the good is the sun, right? As we see in the allegory of the cave. And so just as the sun makes things visible and lets them grow, in the same way, the form of the good, that is goodness itself, right? Just pure goodness, I guess is a way to think about it, makes things knowable, makes things intelligible, makes things possible. Now, what I like about this is that Plato builds into the very fabric of reality that reality is good, that reality is intelligible, right? Which is cool in its own way, right? So the world around us is a hostile world, right? You just have to watch the news for 5 minutes to get that, the world's kind of a shitty place lots of times. But on Plato's view of the world, what we find is we find a world that is, at its very essence, at its very core, a good world. The world could not be without the form of the good, right? So the form of the good makes the forms intelligible, makes them able to be patterned by the world around us. And so while it may exists with our physical bodies in the realm of forms. Nonetheless, the form of the good makes other forms intelligible, makes the world patterned, or I guess makes them patternable, right? The world is able to be patterned after other forms because they are good, and that makes the world around us good as well.